Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Devin Simmons, the STEM Lyceums Program Manager, and I am thrilled to present to you From Molecules to Medicine, Pathways in Pharmaceutics and Therapeutics webinar, sponsored by the Claude Moore Charitable Foundation. If you have any friends that have registered or wanted to come to this webinar, please let them know that we're starting so that they don't miss out on any of the insightful information that our speakers have presented for you. The Center for Excellence in Education was founded in 1983 by Joanne DeGennaro and the late Admiral H.G. Rickover, who is the father of nuclear navy and civilian uses of nuclear power. CEE's mission is to nurture high school and university scholars to careers of excellence in leadership in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and encourages collaboration between and among scientific and technological leaders in the global community. You may visit CEE's website to learn more about the center's cost-free programs for students and teachers, such as the Research Science Institute, USA Bioolympiad, Teacher Enrichment Program, and STEM Lyceums. We are pleased to have two extremely insightful speakers for today's webinar, Emmeline Blanchard and Suzanne Lee. Emmeline Blanchard is a senior research scientist at Spark Therapeutics, specializing in gene therapies for hemophilia and genetic diseases. With a background in cell biology, virology, and microscopy, she excels in experimental design and collaborative research. Dr. Blanchard's academic foundation includes a BS in Bioengineering from the University of Pittsburgh, where she conducted research and taught as a TA. Dr. Blanchard completed her PhD in Biomedical Engineering at Georgia Tech, where her postdoctoral work focused on respiratory syncytial virus and influenza A virus. During her academic journey, she served as an NSF Graduate Research Fellow, NIH GTBiomaterials trainee, and teaching assistant. She also mentored an undergraduate research, and she also was a mentor as an undergraduate researcher and led the Women in Biomedical Engineering group. Emmeline Blanchard. And our second presenter is Suzanne Lee. Suzanne Lee is a partner in Goodwin's Life Sciences Group in Life Sciences Regulatory and Compliance Practice. Susan advises innovative biologics and drug companies on FDA regulatory and compliance matters that arise in the development and commercialization of new products and indications. She draws on her broad expertise to provide strategic advice in the context of investigations, litigation, corporate transaction, and securities disclosures. Susan has experience with FDA matters that arise in due diligence, SEC filings and press releases, licensing and collaboration agreements, and agreements with distributors, specialty pharmacies, CRO and CMOs, consultants, and other key partners. She earned an AB in biology from Harvard University and a JD Harvard Law School. Susan is a 1991 alum of CEE's Research Science Institute. Susan Lee. And so now we are going to get started with Emmeline Blanchard's presentation, and I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Emmeline, you can take over.
Thank you so much, Devin. Let's see if I can share this successfully. Thank you for the warm welcome. As Devin said, my name is Dr. Emmeline Blanchard. I am a senior research scientist at Spark Therapeutics, which is a gene therapy company, general pharma, biotech field, based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I was asked to come here today, talk a little bit about my career path, what I do, and also the route I took to get here. So to start off with that, I got my bachelor's, as Devin said, in bioengineering from the University of Pittsburgh. I knew I wanted to do bioengineering. I figured this out in high school. Prior to college, I came in wanting to do this because I really liked my science and math classes in high school. I was fascinated by both. I found them all really interesting. And overall, I was interested in the medical field, but ultimately decided I didn't want to become a medical doctor, as in actually treating patients myself. I was more interested on the research side of things, basically coming up with either products or drugs or something that would allow doctors to then treat their patients. I was more interested in the back end of it, but that was where my interests lie. And then I was liking my classes and all of this, and was really strengthened, by my opinion, before going into college by doing a high school summer STEM program. I went up to Worcester Polytechnic Institute, or WPI, in Worcester, Massachusetts, where they offered a number of different topics, and I essentially went there for 2 weeks did a biology class where we learned basic materials in the morning, and then in the afternoon did all sorts of cool hands-on experiments in the actual lab beyond what I had access to at my high school. And it was this really great experience for kind of getting a glimpse of what college was like. I lived in the dorms for 2 weeks. I ate in the cafeterias. I spent all this time with a whole bunch of fellow science nerds who are passionate about it. And then I also got access and interest into what was going on the bio side of things, and a little bit more in depth, but also a wide breadth than what I was getting just in my high school classes. And so I knew I wanted to do this. I knew I wanted to do research, and I picked bioengineering specifically because I could have gone in just biology or neuroscience or any of the areas bio-related majors, but I also wanted to bring the math into it. I liked it a lot, and I knew engineering would help me do that. And I was very pleased to find out when I actually got to college and was doing the major that another really big strength, at least that I found of bioengineering, was that it really stressed teamwork and problem solving. I didn't get a biology major or anything else, so I can't speak to what those majors are like. But from my experiencing in engineering, almost every class we had wasn't just the memorizing of the material. We weren't just learning about how a cell works. We were also doing a lot of group projects, working together to do reports, to basically figure out things, to propose ideas. And a lot of it was really hands-on too. I did a senior design project. That was the class, it was 2 semesters. It was your full senior year. We got put in a group, and we basically were told to look at the healthcare field, talk to healthcare professionals, see where there's a problem or something lacking, and figure it out and solve it. So identified a problem, we got together, we brainstormed, my small team and I. We did a theoretical model. We then developed an actual prototype and tested it and presented it to some people in the field to see whether or not it was something they would use, iterated on the model, and got the full experience from start to finish of using our engineering degree to solve a problem. And I loved it. And it was really showing me a lot about how to work as a team and how to solve problems. The major as a whole, like I said, was very math and science heavy, which is what I was looking for, but they still make sure you're well-rounded. You still take humanities classes. They don't let you just completely silo yourself off into the science, to classes from everything from French to grant writing to a class that focused just on myths and folktales and how we have adapted them to our society today. I also got, and highly recommend along your college career, got minors. I got minors in chemistry and math. Again, that science and math interests of mine, but it was a really great way to show a record on your transcript and also your resume that you have experiences beyond just your major and practical, skills in these things. And it doesn't necessarily require a lot of work. For the math minor, I had to take a couple of extra classes, but for the chemistry minor, it actually was fulfilled by everything I already was required to take as part of my major. And so it's just a matter of filling out the forms and getting it signed to be like, hey, look, I know my major is bioengineering, but I took a lot of chemistry classes as part of this. I am also, expert and have experience in this as well. And so it was a great way to show that coming out of college. But the biggest and most beneficial thing I can say from the college experience, if you're looking to go into research for the pharma field, is getting that experience starting in college. You don't have to wait until you're done in order to do this. I started my sophomore year, but I had some classmates who started their freshman year, essentially working in a lab part-time. I worked 10 to 20 hours a week. I did it volunteering. I know some schools and some programs will give you class credit for it. Some will actually even pay you, just depending on your program. And I got, real experience from the beginning, both telling me whether or not I liked it. This thing I wanted to do as my career, was it something I actually liked and practice, but also real experience I could put in my resume and say, I know how to do all these various things before I even got out of college. A lot of universities will have labs like this if they have the science programs. Most of them are also going to have labs where you can do research. But there are also opportunities if your university or college doesn't, outside of your college in the summers, that you can do instead. I did a research internship at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh doing research, and also a summer research experience for undergraduates, also called REUs, that colleges offer in the summer that are 8 to 10 week long programs where you go to a school that's not your own and do research, and again, get that experience. So even if your school doesn't have it, I still highly recommend doing something in order to gain the experience. There's also the option of a lot of schools have co-op programs where you essentially alternate semesters of full-time work at an actual company, getting paid and then a semester of school. So you take a little bit longer to graduate, but you get by the end a full year's worth of work experience actually in a company. So not only do you have that experience and learning whether or not you like it while getting paid, you also have then those contacts in the industry. And if you're willing to graduate a little bit later, more like 4.5 or 5 years rather than just 4 years, it can be a really valuable experience. But whatever way you go, it's a really useful way of figuring out whether or not you like it. I have some classmates from college who did it and decided they didn't actually like doing research after all. And so they could pivot prior to graduating, either completely switching the majors if they felt that was necessary, or saying, okay, what else can my major get me? I have a friend who didn't like the research side of things, but she still liked the bioengineering major, and she pivoted and got her master's in prosthetics, like designing and like helping people with prosthetic limbs. And she wouldn't have known that until it was kind of too late to take some extra classes to focus that if she hadn't done the research experience first. Me, on the other hand, I loved it. I was hooked. It was what I had thought I wanted to do, and I was really glad to find out I liked it. It was interesting. It was something I could see myself doing long term. So I went straight from college into graduate school. I got my PhD in Biomedical Engineering from a joint program between Georgia Tech and Emory University down in Atlanta. Not everyone goes straight into grad school. Some people don't go to grad school at all. You can get jobs in the pharma field without it. I wanted to start my career at a place where I was already kind of having the ownership over my ideas, starting at a level where I was kind of using my ideas and my thoughts in order to do it, versus kind of like working your way up if you start at a lower level. But also some people take gap years before they go to graduate school. Some people work for a couple years and then go back to graduate school. Me, I knew I wanted to do this. I didn't want to wait. I just went right ahead and went straight in. Graduate school is a little bit different if you're a PhD than it is in school in high school or even school in college is. Initially, you take classes while also doing research, but now rather than research like part-time, like I did in undergraduate, in grad school, your research was the full-time and your classes are the part-time. I took 1 to at most 3 classes at a time while doing my full-time research, and then was done with my classes by halfway through year 2. And then the rest of the time took about 5 years. I was just doing research full time. That's what you're really there for, is you're basically talk to whatever professor you're working for in the lab. When you get there, you guys figure out a problem together. And then over the course of your, how many years it takes you, you're working on that research and figuring it out and solving the problem. Along the way, a really nice aspect of a science PhD is that you get paid. The graduate labs, the professors who run them get funding from the government, from the universities, from nonprofits who are focused on a disease or something to do the research. And part of that is the money to pay their students who are working on the project. So your tuition gets paid for, you don't have to pay for tuition. And you also get a stipend that is not huge, don't get me wrong, you're not living large, but it's enough such that you don't need to work a second job or anything or take on debt while doing research, so you can really focus on your graduate degree. You can also get outside fellowships. As Devin mentioned in my beginning, I got a National Science Foundation graduate research fellowship and was also a trainee from the NIH. Basically, these are government agencies that fund scientific research and medical research. And in addition to funding the research themselves, they fund people to be trained in ways that they think are beneficial because it's better for the country as a whole if we have strong scientists who are going to help solve our problems. And so these are some additional funding sources that can both look prestigious, but also help you along the way, a little bit extra funding and support and training. At the end, like I said, you're doing research full time. This is what you're really doing. You finish whenever you have enough to kind of solve your problem. It's not necessarily the same thing you started off working on in the beginning. Sometimes you find something interesting along the way and take a whole detour and something else becomes your main focus. But in the end, you write and then defend something called a dissertation or a thesis, a very long document. Mine was like a full-on book, almost the way it looked when I was done with it, and explaining everything you've done, because it's 5 years worth of work, explaining what it is, saying this is how I did it, this is what I believe happens, these are the next steps I would do if I was continuing on with it. And then you defend it. You get up in front of your friends, your family, your classmates, as well as a panel or committee of experts, other professors in the field, and then explain everything. Because a big part of research is being able to talk about it and explain it to people. So you can't just write it, you gotta be able to talk about it. And so you present on it, then you send everybody, like the public, your friends and family out of the room. You have a closed session with just the committee of experts. where they question you on your work and make sure you actually know it and it's really your work and you can explain it fully to their questions and think about answers to their questions, all in all together showing that you have learned how to think and how to work through a problem and form a hypothesis and solve it. And then if you're successful at that, which you will be by that point, you've done a lot of work to get there, you walk out of the room and you're officially a doctor, you have your PhD. And so that can vary in how much time it takes depending on what your work is. But overall, it's probably going to take 4 to 6 years if you're in the science field. And at the end, you are the world expert on a very specific, very narrow topic. You're the one, you had this problem, you solved it, so you're the only one in the world who knows it as well as you do. But it's going to be on something very specific that you focused all your time on. It's not going to be, you're not going to solve, unless you're incredibly smart and incredibly lucky, you're not going to be the one that solved cancer single-handedly, right? But you might solve a very specific part of it and learn more about how one specific aspect of it works. My thesis in particular, because I was engineering, I was a little bit more method development. I worked on developing new imaging-based methods using microscopes to look at how RNA and proteins interact in different disease states like cancer or respiratory syncytial virus, RSV, and other infectious diseases. And that's not necessarily what I do now. What you do your thesis on, for most people, isn't going to be what they do long term. You can, some people start companies based off their work, some people go on and become professors themselves and focus on that for the rest of their careers. But most people will switch to something else because, again, you're very highly specialized and it's not necessarily companies that can focus all their energy on just that one topic. I then did a postdoctoral position. In academia, there's this thing called postdocs, where they're short-term, normally 1 to maybe 5 years at most, positions where you know how long it's going to be, and it's essentially to broaden your experience. Like I said, we're focused on one very specific thing in your PhD. This is a short-term job to kind of gain some knowledge in a related but different field and build your resume and skills that way. So I did this for about a year at the Georgia Tech. There is focused a little bit off of method development, a little bit more on therapeutics for infectious disease. And then from there went to my job at Spark. Before I talk about that, however, I wanted to give you just a brief glimpse onto what I did in grad school, because I still think it's interesting and I hope you do too. And can certainly answer more questions about it. This will be very, very general. But this is respiratory syncytial virus, RSV. It's a respiratory disease that mostly is an issue if you're for babies or if you have, you're immunocompromised or the really elderly, a healthy adult or teenager is not going to be too affected by RSV. But up until very recently, you might have heard about it in the news because the first vaccine for RSV got approved. Until recently, there was no vaccines for it and there weren't really great therapeutics. And the way you develop those things is to learn more about how it works. How does the virus infect cells? How does it make more of itself? How does it evade the immune system? One of the ways we can learn about this is through looking at it and looking at the structures it forms inside the cell. That's what my lab was focused on. We did a lot of imaging and looking at things. And so on the far left, these are all images that either one of my coworkers in the lab took or I took myself on microscopes. This far left, these are images of cells that are infected with RSV. These big white circles, these are each a nucleus of a cell. And then we use a technique called immunofluorescence to essentially paint all the different structures of a virus with their own unique color. It's not really a color, it's how the microscope interprets it, but allow us to see the structure of it. If these cells were not infected, it would just be this nucleus and a black background. The technique would show nothing. Because these cells are infected, you can see all these different structures the virus is making in the cell and then learn about it. This structure, this arrow is pointing out, this red circle that you also see in other places, this is an inclusion body. It's just the name biologists named for it a while ago. But it's a structure in the virus that the virus makes in the cell that is thought to be where the virus makes more of itself, where it replicates. But we need to know more about it in order to see what it's actually doing so that you can then treat it. And so you can't really see much in this image, right? So then next we can go to a different microscope, a super resolution microscope that allows us to see very tiny things. The scale bar is 9 microns to kind of get you an idea of what we're looking at. The thickness of a human hair is about 70 microns. So this is not something the human eye can see. And so we can see a lot better the structure, but we still don't really know what's going on. And so then my work in graduate school, one of them was developing a technique to look inside. And with the technique I worked on, we can now see all these yellow splotches. These are the polymerase. This is a protein in the virus that the virus makes that makes more of itself. And so prior to doing this, we didn't know what it would look like. We thought it was there. We had never seen it before. So we didn't know if it was completely full, if there was a single one inside of it, if there were multiple. We had no idea. And so with this, took this image, and this is what really excites me. First one ever in the world or history to know what it looked like inside of it and the structure and how it looked. So when I took this picture, that's when we discovered it. And so you can see it forms these clusters. There's different areas where it is, there's areas where it's not, there's more than one in the structure. And from there, I can then do further research and say, okay, now we know what it is and how it works. How can we stop it? And then the work goes from there. It's not something I can do all on my own. The next person takes up the baton and keeps working on it. But overall, I think it's cool personally. It's interesting how it all works. And your thesis is much more than just this very specific thing. This is just an example. But you get to do a lot of cool stuff along the way. From here, I went on to work at Spark Therapeutics. At Spark, I shifted my focus, right? Like I said, you don't always do what you research in grad school for your career. Spark is a gene therapy company. We work on genetic diseases, not infectious diseases. And I'll get onto that a little bit on my next slide. But I came to Spark, work with a team of about 20-something people, among a company of a lot more than that. We're very interdisciplinary. Not everyone came about it by the same route as me. Honestly, pretty much nobody. There's majors of all different types and all different backgrounds, all the different sciences. Even people aren't actually science people. There are people, like I said, statistics. I had this example here. We also, to do our analytics and our data analysis, we need people who know the math side of things. We have people who come from writing backgrounds for the most part and who like the science. And so they wanted to be involved with the science, but their strengths were writing. And so we have a scientific writing team who helps us be able to explain it to people. We've got a legal team, we've got business people, we have all these different people all working in a STEM company doing related science things. And even again, all the different science majors, we have people focus on almost any specialty you can imagine, working together to form our products and help people. I specifically work on the systemic preclinical research team, which means systemic, that classifies what we kind of focus on. So that's actually kind of a catch-all. Some of the other teams, we have like a CNS team or an ocular team. They're more focused on particular parts of the body. We're systemic because we focus on pretty much everything else. We also have the preclinical. That means we do not work on people. We take it from idea to being ready to test in people. So we're kind of all the early work. I spend about a third of my time actually in the lab doing experiments. There's me and my personal protective equipment, PPE, my lab coat, my glasses, my goggles, my gloves. About a third of my time actually in the lab doing experiments. Third of my time kind of managing cross-functional teams. Science is a team sport. You got to all be working together. And so someone's got to coordinate between the different groups doing the different parts, making sure it's all running smoothly. So I do a lot of that. And then the rest of my time figuring out what the results I got mean, analyzing it, explaining it, showing it to people, and that kind of work. Overall, the thing I love most about my job is the impact of my work on patients. You can see in my, there we go, Zoom background, one of our Spark values is championing the patient. And I think that's true for a lot of biotech companies. The work we do, if we're successful, can really change patients' lives and hopefully make them better and even save them. And it's a really great motivator coming to work every day, knowing that, if I work hard and if the stuff I'm working on works out, it can make a big difference. And I really, really love that. I also love the problem solving aspect. Like I said, came to this through engineering. I like working on a problem. I like figuring it out. It's always fascinated me. It's collaborative. I said teamwork. We can't do this alone. We're all working together. People are always willing to help out, help you solve a problem. It's also dynamic. The stuff I'm doing changes every day. Even if the actual experimental technique I'm doing doesn't change. Say I'm looking in the microscope every day, the thing I'm actually looking at is different. Once you solve one problem, move on to the next. You're not going to be doing the same thing every day for the rest of your life because once you solve it, you move on. And so it always stays interesting. Like any job, there's downsides, of course. The biggest one of research, I think, for me at least, is that it can be really frustrating. A good portion of science is failure, the experiment not working, figuring out why it doesn't work and keep going. Sometimes you can't figure out why it doesn't work. Sometimes you never do, or sometimes you need help to figure it out. But it makes it all the more satisfying when you then, after a long time of beating your head against the wall, actually figure out how to solve the problem. And some of the skills I think that are helpful, you probably guessed from everything I've been talking about so far. Liking the problem solving is really important. Being a team player and being able to work well with others, and also an attention to detail. Sometimes it's the smallest thing that really makes the difference in making something work or not work. So briefly, to summarize what we do here at Spark, we're a gene therapy company. We work on genetic diseases, which is where something you're born with. It's not something that can be spread from person to person. You have a mutation in your DNA, and that mutation means your gene's not going to work. It's either going to work wrong or it's not going to work at all, and that's going to affect your health, sometimes in pretty serious ways, sometimes in minor ways, sometimes in ways where it's not survivable. What we do at Spark, we use adeno-associated viral vectors, what we call AAV, as a gene therapy vector to deliver a healthy gene into the cells. When you deliver the healthy gene, it can replace the mutated gene and basically restore you to health. We essentially take this virus that knows how to infect cells and all that, we learn from it and use it to deliver our healthy part instead of the viral parts. It's essentially like if you have a truck that delivers oranges to a grocery store every day, right? The driver knows the route, the roads are paved, the truck is built, and knows how to get there, it can deliver oranges. If we want to deliver apples instead, we don't have to figure out how to build a truck for the first time. We can take out the oranges, put in the apples, and then use those same roads, that same driver, and that same truck and get it there. So that's what we're doing. Rather than spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to make a delivery vehicle, we are using the existing one from nature, taking out all the bad stuff, putting in our healthy gene, and using it to get to the patients. And in theory, if you're delivering this healthy gene, it sticks around and it's then there for the rest of a patient's life. So the goal is for this to not just be like a treatment or a medicine to help symptoms, but to be a cure is the long-term goal if we're successful. This is a new field, the gene therapy field. Spark's only been around for about 10 years. And we were the first company to have a product using this method approved in the US and in the European Union. We have a drug called Luxturna that is used to treat a form of inherited retinal disease where patients lose their sight eventually and go blind. And this product, when delivered early enough, can restore their sight, which is really amazing. We have some other products that are in clinical trials, working to get them developed, and other stuff that's earlier than that in the preclinical phase. There's a whole bunch of us working on this. There's over 700 employees all working together to solve these problems in a whole lot of space and labs, all based up in Philadelphia. And overall, we were originally a startup, but now are a member of the Roche pharmaceutical family. And so work together to use their resources to take us forward into the future of gene therapy. We target a number of different areas. Like I said, the inherited retinal diseases. We also liver delivery, which is now called systemic. That's where I work. I specifically work on hemophilia, which is a bleeding disorder where you're missing a key part of your clotting process. So normally, right, if you get an injury or a cut, your blood's going to eventually clot, you're going to get in a scab, and it's going to get healed. In hemophilia, that doesn't happen. You'll just keep bleeding. So I'm working on a team to try and help that and stop that from happening anymore. And we also have a team focused on the central nervous system and the brain, trying to treat diseases there. And overall, I think here at Spark, we really believe this is going to be transformative. We think this is going to really help people all across the world, both us, who again, we got the first one on the market. There's other ones in the market now, and we are working on more, and there's other companies working on more, and university people at universities working on it. We really believe this is a powerful method in order to, that's going to help change the world. Make no life limited by disease. That's her corporate vision. But I really think the potential for all of us working together with our current scientists and the scientists of the future, like hopefully all of you, can really take this forward into the future and really not just help people, but save people's lives. And that's the end goal. And that is all I have. And I'm happy to answer questions at the end if you have them for me. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blanchard. Like she said, there will be questions at the end because I know she gave a lot of great information. So if you do have any questions for both of our speakers, please save them for at the end. We will have a question and answer portion for that. But again, thank you, Dr. Blanchard, for your presentation and everything that you do. And now I'm going to turn it over to Susan, so she will give her presentation.
Thanks so much, Devin. And Emmeline, thank you for your presentation. It's so wonderful to share the screen with you. And, you hit on several themes that, I think I'm going to touch on in mine as well. So, I think having us both together talking on this panel is super interesting juxtaposition, because as Emmeline was talking about all of the scientific development that she and her team at her company are working on, really my career path has evolved from, early on when I was in high school and in college, being very interested in basic science and maybe even being a doctor. But as the years have gone on, my career has really focused on, well, how do you take a great scientific idea and make it into a product that can be approved and introduced onto the market, and then actually be commercially successful, which is just as important to be able to kind of fuel the economic engine that then allows further therapies to be developed. And, I would say that, at the time that I was really interested in science, and that was for many, many years, I would say up until the time I was about 22 or 23, I thought I was going to be a doctor scientist. I don't think I would have ever predicted that I would have found the kind of career pathways that I did, where I could combine my interest in science and my knowledge about science, but then also translate it into a business setting and into a legal setting. So that's what I'm hoping to tell you about today, is just really maybe open your perspectives to some other pathways that are available in this field of pharmaceuticals and therapeutics. So I just wanted to briefly tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Rhode Island, and in that capacity, didn't have a ton of access to really complex, scientific infrastructure. So really one of the really important things on my journey to getting very interested in science beyond just, studying things in school and being very interested in those topics was in high school having an opportunity to be part of the Research Science Institute, which is sponsored by the Center for Excellence in Education. And that was a summer program that I attended after my junior year of high school, where there were over 100 students from really around the country and around the world who were also very interested in science. And we all got internships for the entire summer for 6 weeks, where we were working on a project and got to work with a mentor and, really got to learn deeply about the scientific process and to have the experience of doing an experiment. And, I would say that was just such a transformative and igniting experience to, I think as Emmeline said, I think she had similar experiences with programs like that, where she was able to get together with like-minded students. It really is just such a special experience when you can connect very deeply with others who are, sharing similar interests to you and are kind of on a similar path. And, I would say it's kind of amazing, because some of those people that I met at the Research Science Institute are people that I see in my career path, or, have really intersected paths with over time. So I guess just, for those of you who are listening to this today, certainly seeking out those kinds of experiences, would highly encourage that. And, I think there are more of these kinds of experiences available now, which is great. I think to try to give more people opportunities to engage with STEM earlier on. So definitely look for that. So grew up in Rhode Island, went a little bit north for college to Harvard. I did major in biology, and I can talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. But, I think I started out very scientifically focused. I took a lot of the sort of hardcore research-oriented biology classes, but, something happened along the way. Emmeline mentioned that, when she was in college, she also had to take these other classes like the mythology class and, things that, make you a well-rounded person. And, I think I had a similar analogous experience in college, where I started getting very interested in government classes and economic classes, that were available. And even though I didn't really have a fully baked idea of exactly how I wanted it to all come together at that time, I was starting to think, maybe I'm not necessarily going to want to be in a lab all the time. Maybe I want to do something with my science that's a little bit different or kind of combines these other like policy elements or government elements or economic elements. I mean, I didn't really know at the time, but I think it was starting to shift for me a little bit even in college. And when I did my senior thesis, I think I was the only biology major that year that didn't do a lab-based thesis. I did more of a comprehensive literature review on the science of addiction. So I was really interested in kind of looking at the synthesis of what we currently know and identifying things that we didn't know. And, I did apply to medical school in my senior year of college and decided to defer because I got a job to do consulting. And I can talk a little bit more about that. And I mostly took this job in consulting because my father, who was a doctor, said, you need to learn about the business of medicine if you're going to be a doctor. And so I really viewed this opportunity to work in consulting as a way to learn about the business, have an experience working in sort of like a real professional setting. And then the plan was to go back to medical school eventually. But those were sort of some famous last words. I ended up never going to medical school. I did consulting for several years in New York and then went on to law school. And I guess maybe just to explain that, I mean, if you're doing business work, why go to law school? What I was finding in my consulting work, which was for biotech and medical device companies, was that so many of the business problems that they were trying to solve were driven by legal issues, legal and regulatory issues. So, if you're a large company like Johnson & Johnson, or even if you're a smaller company that's a startup like Spark was at one time before they became part of Roche, really the question is, how are you going to take what is a great scientific idea and a concept and then get it through the development process, which is many, many years long, highly risky. As Emmeline said, a lot of times your research is going to fail. That's just an intrinsic part of the process. And so it just becomes extremely expensive to be able to develop a therapeutic that's ultimately successful. And along the way, there are all these legal and regulatory things that developers need to think about. Like what are some of the patents that we're going to be able to get for certain aspects of our technology that are going to be really important for us to be able to protect the uniqueness of our invention. And then just from a timing perspective, understanding what's going to be the regulatory process that a product needs to go through in order to actually be approved and be able to be marketed in the United States or in a European market or in any part of the world, frankly, was really critical for my clients in consulting to be able to know, and how long it was going to take to be able to get through that process, how much risk was there really. And then on the back end, understanding, well, what kind of reimbursement and payment structures are available for a particular product so that you could really start to understand, all right, if we're going to need to pay so much upfront to develop this product, are we actually going to be able to recoup our investment on the back end in the time that we need to in order to make it an attractive business proposition as well as a scientific and clinical proposition as well. So that was really why I went to law school. I felt like it would make me a better business counselor because I would be able to bring those kinds of insights to bear. And so that was sort of my educational path. Like a lot of lawyers, I ended up spending a summer in DC and fell in love with DC. So that's where I've been living ever since I graduated from law school. I am married and I have a child. We live in the suburbs now in Bethesda, Maryland. And we have a dog. I'd like to play tennis. I'd like to travel. So, even if you have a great career in science or something adjacent to that, you can also do a lot of other things in life as well. So thank you, Devin. Next slide. So, I think just in terms of how this all came together, I think I've already started telling the story a little bit, but, I really did, I was very focused on science for a long time. And, even though science has evolved a tremendous amount since, when I was in a lab and doing some sequencing and, kind of doing it with my own two hands, I think some of those very basic skills and, having been involved in the process, like understanding how long it takes to do an experiment and where are the places where an experiment can go wrong. Those are all things that, I bring to my work every single day when I'm talking to clients, either on a legal side or if I'm talking to them about a business issue that's related to a legal issue. So, I don't at all think that time that I was really interested in basic science or like doing basic science was at all a detour. I actually think it's a really essential part of the work that I do today. And, when I went into consulting and I did that for 6 years when I was at McKinsey, both in New York and then in DC, I found that my scientific background was so relevant in that when I was talking to clients, I could very quickly, understand what they were talking about. If they were saying like, we think our molecule is going to be differentiated from a competitor's molecule because, it's a stereoisomer of, this molecule, or because, we think it's going to have different pharmacokinetics, which is going to lead to, a quicker onset of action. And, I think that there were a lot of my colleagues, who are in consulting and certainly now in the law, who have picked up those concepts over time as well. So it's not to say that you have to have had the scientific background in order to have careers in life sciences consulting or in regulatory law, but I have found it to be very, very helpful. And, I think it provides, for me, at least, like just a really additional rich dimension to what I do, to be able to like deeply understand what scientific advances my clients are working on. And so, really as between my consulting work and then my legal work, I actually think they're pretty related in the sense that, even though at McKinsey I was doing, business problems and like working with spreadsheets and it was a lot of numbers and we were talking about returns on investment, competitive differentiation and, strategies, business strategies, et cetera. I feel like a lot of my work as an FDA regulatory lawyer is also related to that. I mean, it's often regulatory strategies and legal strategies that are supportive of the business strategy, or it's legal strategies that are important to be able to defend against competitive threats that may come, from other parts of the business. It's also about understanding, well, how might regulatory frameworks change in response to shifting science. And so really it's been surprisingly like a seamless transition, I think, from the business consulting side to the legal advice side. And I've certainly found, which has been interesting, that a lot of my clients are the same entities from when I was in consulting as to when I'm in a law firm setting. So I thought I would maybe just provide a couple of examples, if we flip to the next slide, Devin, of, what are some of the types of questions that I was thinking about when I was a consultant. So just examples of some of the types of business problems that you might have a chance to work on if you were to go into this type of field. And, it could be in a consulting firm. I think it could also be if you work for a company like Spark. There are plenty of people in corporate strategy who are thinking about these same types of questions, right? Because it's all about, where should we as a company focus our investment, both dollars and time, in a way that's going to be unique, where we're not doing something that somebody else is doing, and where we think we're going to, be able to apply our capabilities and get the best return on our investment. So questions like, where should we focus or prioritize our product portfolio? You might think about things like, how much money are we making today? And, how much growth do we think there is left? How is that distributed across different geographies? What are some of the competitive dynamics? What are some of our strategic and corporate priorities? And then, I think importantly from a scientific side, for those of us who, have an abiding love for STEM, it's like, what are our real capabilities? Where do we think we're differentiated? What's our special sauce? Or like, what do we have as a platform that's different from what any other company could be doing? Another example of a classic consulting or business question is, we have an opportunity to buy a new technology, or, maybe to acquire another company. How much should we pay for it? So these are really fun because you really get to dive into, well, what is this new technology? How much should we, where do we think we can use it? So by its very nature, it's not being used in anything today. So we have to say like, all right, well, if we have this really great way of visualizing molecules now, how should we apply it? What disease areas will it be really useful for? How can we use it with other tools that we already have within our company? Are there any synergies here where if we get this tool and add it to something else, it's like 1 + 1 is 4 rather than 1 + 1 is 2? Understanding how it's differentiated, and then finally turning it into some, scenarios of dollars and cents. We think this technology will be useful for this. We think, it's going to be have this value, and so therefore, we think we should pay, X amount for this company. And there are tons of transactions, as you might see in the life sciences field, that are very much driven by questions like this. Why should we combine, and what are the terms on which we do it? So on the legal side, it is a slightly different angle, notwithstanding my view that, I think that these are often very related questions. So, some of the ways in which I think I've been able to apply my scientific background in a legal setting is, for example, a question about, should a particular disease state, how should it be defined for orphan drug designation purposes? So this is something that in US regulatory law is a great benefit if you can get it, is to get orphan drug designation, because what it means is that your product has kind of a lock on the market for 7 years. And there's a lot of other tax benefits and other research credits that you can get consistent with orphan drug designation. But what it means is that your product has to be intended for a disease that affects less than 200,000 people per year in the United States. So how you figure that out and how you determine whether a particular disease state and how you define the scope of it, can fit under orphan drug designation is, can be a very interesting argument that you make to the FDA. So, that has been a subject of some really interesting questions that I've worked on. And then, at the right is another example of where, statistics and also understanding science can be really helpful if we're trying to advocate for a client where, maybe they've gone through a very, very long development process, and now they're finally at the sort of the end of that development process, and they're doing what's called a pivotal trial, which is really sort of like a final exam before you go before the regulator to say like, hey, we think that we've got something that's really good here. And you should approve us. You should allow us to be commercialized on the market. And we think that there's evidence of a clinical benefit for patients. Sometimes in these final trials, you get ambiguous results. And that can be for a whole host of reasons. Sometimes it's the study design. Sometimes there are strange things that can happen in your comparison groups. Sometimes there are things, maybe that weren't fully understood about the nature of the disease that can lead to these kinds of results. So sometimes, we're in a position of having to argue to the regulators that, yeah, even if we didn't show a statistically significant effect in this trial, right, p less than 0.05, you should still approve us because X, Y, and Z. And so there, really understanding the disease state, really understanding the statistics can be very helpful for making a legal and a regulatory argument. I just thought I would highlight a couple of examples of, just as I look back on my time in both business and law, some of the matters or the projects that I thought were just really fun and interesting, and feel really privileged to have had a chance to be part of. So one was, as a lawyer, I had a chance to help this company called Verily, which some of you may be familiar with, some of you maybe not. But once upon a time, Verily was not its own independent company. It was part of Google, and it was part of the sort of like the skunk works of Google. They had this incubator where they were developing all kinds of things like self-driving cars, like Waymo, before it was Waymo, was part of Google X also. And likewise, Verily was Google's effort to try to apply, all of their informatics technology to life sciences and trying to figure out ways to improve therapeutics. And so at the time, I had a friend who had worked at the law firm with me who became one of the senior lawyers at this company while it was still in Google X and it didn't really have a name. And they said, hey, we really need to figure out how we're going to take what we have and the ideas that we have and like turn them into products that we think we can get approved by the FDA. And we feel like we need to, understand how to like meet all of the regulatory requirements too. Because really it was a company that was full of engineers who are used to working on code and not necessarily designing and conducting the kinds of clinical trials and other evaluations that they would need in order to be able to develop products that would meet regulatory standards and ultimately get to be approved. So I would say like over the course of 2.5 years, it was a pretty intensive opportunity to really advise them on not only specific products and how they could position them with the agency and be able to figure out pathways for getting them developed and approved, but also to help them set up their company just governance infrastructure so that they could be a real life sciences company. And I think it was about 1.5 years after that they were spun out to become Verily as an independent company. So that was a really neat opportunity to help give birth to a company that started out as an idea, didn't really even start out as a biotech company, but then ultimately became one. And I think has still continued to be successful, and they're innovating in a lot of other different areas. And then one I'll just highlight, this is the National Health Service, NHS. This is not so much, I guess, in life sciences, but it was a really neat opportunity to be able to work with the National Health Service while I was at McKinsey and doing consulting work. One of the things that they were very interested in doing, as you may know, in the UK, it's a state-run hospital system, whereas in the US, we have a combination of state-run, but mostly privately run hospitals. And so the NHS was really interested in understanding how they could inject more private sector type incentives and structures into the NHS so that they could improve not only the efficiency of the clinical care they were providing and bring wait times down and increase the quality of the care, but also to get the NHS a little bit more involved in, biomedical research and like doing things that were more characteristic of the kinds of high performing and world leading academic health centers that we have here in the United States. So that proved to be a pretty complex project because, as you can imagine, there were a lot of political hurdles that needed to be addressed in addition to just thinking about, some of the business issues and some of the economic issues, but super analytically interesting and a great opportunity to kind of understand how, business concepts and scientific concepts can translate into policy making. So I guess I will probably close it there, but I just wanted to underscore that for those of you who are just thinking about where you would like to take your career paths, there are so many other science adjacent career paths that are available to you as well. And so I hope that this has just been useful as just one example of the types of directions you can take your interest in science.
Yes, thank you so much, Susan, for your wonderful insight and just the way you've combined law and science. And I hope that a few of our attendees have taken a little bit from that. And so now is going to be the time for the question and answer portion from any of the audience members. So if you want to ask any of our speakers any questions, please drop them in the question and answer chat, and I'll be sure to read them off to them. This is a question for Susan. I'm a current high school senior, passionate about the life sciences and business. What advice do you have for things one can do in their undergraduate work and beyond to pursue this passion?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alexander. And, luckily, I think that there are a lot of things that you could do, sometimes simultaneously and maybe sometimes sequentially. So, I think if you're interested in life sciences, it can never hurt to get actual experience similar to Emmeline's and similar to, what I did when I was in college too, doing actual research, because I think doing that and understanding what's really happening in the R&D of a company and what it takes to discover something new or develop something new is invaluable experience. And I think will give you just a lot of credibility and insight into the business actually, of what it takes to develop a product. And then certainly on the business side, I think there are also a lot of internships, and I think even a lot of schools now have clubs like life sciences business clubs, or if you're an undergrad and you have access to a business school at your university, I think you can always try to see how you could get involved in business schools, life sciences entrepreneurship club or similar as well, and that way you can get experience with understanding the types of frameworks and analyses and considerations that go into commercializing and developing products. And so, I think those are some examples of what you could be doing. And certainly by the time I think you're a junior, and maybe after your senior year of college too, you could look for opportunities to, for example, work in a life sciences consulting firm, or maybe to even work at a company where you could get some experience, on the business side or on the scientific side, or maybe even both. And that way, I think you'll place yourself in very good stead to not only demonstrate that you've sought out the experiences and get those experiences, but also figure out, what you like to do and where you'd like to continue to explore your interests. I hope that's helpful.
That was very helpful, and thank you for your answer. I have another question from Raphael, and this can go to either or. What should a high school freshman do to cement their path towards being accepted to a top 20 college?
I can't speak to a top 20 per se, but to any good college, I think probably the things you're already thinking of, right? Taking classes that challenge you, joining clubs and activities, or doing things outside of school that show that you have interests and passions besides just being a student. I think colleges want you to be, not necessarily have to do like 6,000 things, but show that you're a person besides the school, that you have something you're passionate about. That not just shows you took the time, but gives you something to talk about in interviews and in essays. And I would also encourage you to consider also like top 20 is obviously great. But I also consider the same things that prepare you to get into the top-notch schools can also prepare you to get into still very, very good schools, but schools that will also give you scholarships. University of Pittsburgh was not initially my first choice, but they offered me a very good scholarship. And so I was able to graduate college with no debt. And it served me incredibly well. I got just as good of education. Georgia Tech is number 2 in the country for my graduate program, so it didn't hinder me at all. And I got just as great of education coming out debt-free. So that's also something to consider.
Yes, I think everything Dr. Blanchard outlined is a way to get into any good college, not just the top 20, but anywhere that you're trying to go is going to give you a great education. And so I have an anonymous question, and it says, I'm a freshman. Do you think an environmental club and actions towards helping nature could help me discover a life science major?
Totally.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's, I would echo something that Dr. Blanchard said, which is that I think having a passion about something and a real curiosity and pursuing it, even if it's not like, oh, I spend 20 hours a week in a lab as a high school freshman, it doesn't have to be that. But I think, showing that you're really seriously interested in something, that you've formed questions for yourself about what you want to investigate, that you've taken the time, and the energy, maybe even shown leadership to get other people to be interested in it along with you, are things that can be, extremely impressive to colleges. And then I think in terms of whether that would get you to a life sciences major, I think that there is no one path to a life sciences major. I think, as Dr. Blanchard was saying, you could be a real statistical junkie and decide you want to get into a life sciences major. Or, I'm astonished sometimes by the number of people who are executives or, high-level scientists even at biotech companies who started out as an English major. They found their passion in science later on in life. So, I think with understanding nature, there's a very long and storied history of people finding extraordinarily important cures in nature. So I think understanding nature, can certainly be very helpful to finding a life sciences major. But, I kind of broadly think that, if you have a passion and you pursue it, that discipline, that focus, will if you want to have a life sciences, your career later on, you'll be able to do it.
Part of my biology classes was learning also the biology of plants and stuff. It's like just part of the core fundamental learning. A lot of times bioengineering gets linked. It's bio and agricultural engineering for some schools. It's all related, right? How the human body works versus how animal body works versus plants. There's a lot of correlation.
So I just want to say thank you so much to our knowledgeable speakers once again. And another thank you to all of our sponsors, including the Claude Moore Charitable Foundation. And I want to say thank you to all of the attendees for taking the time out to come to this wonderful and knowledgeable webinar. And again, I just want to thank Dr. Blanchard and Susan for taking the time out to provide such a wealth of knowledge in pharmaceutics and therapeutics. And I hope a lot of our attendees took away something from it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. All right, and that will conclude our webinar.